St. Petersburg, capital of Russia, October the 25th, 1917. The time, 21 minutes to 10 in the evening. At anchor in the river Neva, the cruiser Aurora waits to take her place in history. In precisely 1 minute's time, her crew, led by Bolsheviks, will fire a shot to signal the attack on the Winter Palace. At other points in the old city, guns are trained on the last stronghold of the Russian government. Nicholas knew that his grandfather, Alexander II, had been assassinated in 1881 by a revolutionary group which believed that Russia could only achieve freedom through political murder. The murders took place, but the autocracy continued. 6 years later, there was an attempt on the life of Nicholas's father, Alexander III. The ringleaders were caught and executed, and one of them was a student, Alexander Ulyanov. His younger brother heard the news and swore revenge. Outbreaks of violence continued into the reign of Nicholas II, despite the exiles and the executions. The large houses of the rich were frequent targets. But the new revolutionary leaders realized that the word was more important than the bomb. They handed out pamphlets in the tenements and smuggled illegal literature into the factories. And they taught the workers a new weapon of protest, the strike. Revolt spread. Production stopped. Profits were lost. Strikers were treated without mercy. They were the enemies of the state and must be suppressed. files of the secret police bulged with the names of known agitators. One of them was the young man who had sworn to revenge the death of his brother. His name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. Lenin came from Simbirsk, a small provincial town on the shores of the river Volga. He was born in this pleasant yellow frame house in 1870. His father's diligence had rewarded him with the office of Director of Education for the region. His mother was an intelligent and serious woman who, like his father, had been brought up in the middle-class tradition of plain living and high thinking. At the age of 4, Lenin posed with his sister Olga. At the age of 9, he took his place in a portrait of the whole family. His report card proves his diligence. He got 5 out of 5 for everything. His favorite brother, Alexander, was arrested in 1887 for his part in the plot to assassinate the Tsar. And in the prison fortress of Schusselburg, he served his sentence of death. Lenin, now 17, was a marked man. The family moved north to Kazan, and it was here that he first read the works of Karl Marx. In this kitchen, young Lenin found a scientific basis for the socialism which remained the driving force behind the rest of his life. Settled in St. Petersburg after visiting Switzerland to meet the leading Russian socialists in exile, and for a time the Russian watchdogs failed to catch him. He studied law, but most of his days were devoted to the revolutionary underground. He was also very short of money.
Dearest mother, I beg of you to send me, please, a little money, as my own funds have by now almost gone. My landlady is a nagging woman, and when I am not running away from her, I am trying to escape the balalaika which the man in the next room persists in playing.
His life was uncomfortable, and his file in the records of the secret police grew fatter. He escaped them several times, but in the end, his capture was inevitable. Lenin was arrested in Christmas week, 1895, and he spent 14 months in prison without trial. He did exercises to keep fit, and remembering his use of invisible ink as a schoolboy, he smuggled out pamphlets and instructions to his friends. Then, at the age of 27, he was exiled to Siberia. For Lenin, Siberia was easily endured. He had his own house, and time to hunt and skate and walk and argue, and time to think. He learned to be patient and to use Siberia as a training ground for revolution. And from here he sent a message to a fellow exile. Her name was Krupskaya. She answered him simply,
"If I'm to be a wife, so be it."
In the spring of 1899, the authorities obligingly let them marry.
We were young then. We had just been married. We loved each other passionately, and that enhanced our exile. For a time, nothing else existed for us.
When the honeymoon was over, they quickly got down to a translation of a trade union history. From his exile in Siberia, Lenin had planned the publication of a new revolutionary paper, Iskra, the Spark. It was now that Ulyanov began to sign himself Lenin. Iskra had to be smuggled into Russia, and the first edition was published in Germany in 1900. But soon the nervous printers forced it to move to England. It was foggy when Lenin and Krupskaya, now released from exile, arrived in London. They rented 2 The Russian socialists met in a drab London hall. It was now that the future of the revolutionary movement was decided. The party was split down the middle. Lenin's opponents wanted to give party membership to every willing helper.
The more widely the title of member of the party is spread, the better. We can only rejoice if every striker, every demonstrator is able to declare himself a party member.
But Lenin's group was determined that party membership should only be given to a hard core of enthusiasts.
It is better that 10 real workers should not call themselves party members than that one chatterbox should have the right and opportunity to be a member.
Lenin's group won by 2 votes, They became the Bolsheviks, the majority, and the losers were the Mensheviks, the minority.
And there was a fierce discussion as to the tactics to be pursued in Russia at that time. It was soon after the revolutionary events in Russia, and most of the Mensheviks present at that particular gathering, they said, let us have a period of rest now. The workers are tired out. We must not drive them too hard. And now Lenin, on the contrary, he jumped up from his chair in a rather furious mood, which was a little bit out of the common so far as I knew him at the time, and said, that's all nonsense. It's you, messieurs Mensheviks, who are tired. The working class in Russia are not tired, on the contrary. They are full of energy, they are full of desire to fight for their freedom and for the overthrow of Tsardom.
The Tsar himself seemed oblivious of the events which were to decide the fate of his throne, his family, and his country. The date was 1904, and Nicholas was waging a war with Japan to satisfy some dubious territorial ambition. But the formal life of the court continued undisturbed. Far away from this elaborate ceremonial, the Russian armies endured successive defeats and then surrendered to the Japanese at Port Arthur. Lenin dryly noted the disaster.
It is not the Russian people, but the autocracy that has suffered shameful defeat. The Russian people have gained by the defeat of the autocracy. And the capitulation of Port Arthur is only the prelude to the capitulation of the Tsar.
In St. Petersburg, news of the humiliations of the war were followed by the iron cold of January. It had become a winter of discontent. On Sunday, January 9th, 200,000 people marched to the Winter Palace to present a petition to the Tsar. They were all unarmed. They carried icons, and many of them chanted, "God save the Tsar." Their requests for better working conditions were modest, but Nicholas decided not to accept their petition.
Everyone!
The day is known as Bloody Sunday. Over 1,000 of the marchers were killed. 5,000 were wounded, many of them women and children. But the Tsar found time to write his diary as usual.
It was a hard day. In St. Petersburg, serious disturbances occurred because the workers wanted to come to the Winter Palace. The troops had to fire on them, and there were many killed and wounded. My God, how it hurts me, and it was hard to witness. Mother came to lunch, which we all ate together. Then I took Michael for a walk.
Lenin was in Geneva when the first reports of Bloody Sunday reached the outside world. He was on his way to the library with Krupskaya when he heard the news, and at once they changed their plans and rushed to an émigré cafe where they found their excited Bolshevik friends reading the latest editions of the Swiss papers. Lenin now saw his dreams of a revolution within reach.
There must be an armed uprising, an immediate armed uprising. Talk that we cannot win is the talk of cowards.
In the calm of this Geneva library, he applied himself to the grim techniques of civil warfare. This particular volume, the memoirs of the Russian revolutionaries of the 19th century, still contains his notes in the margins of its pages. In St. Petersburg in October 1905, representatives of the city's workers met for the first time. They called themselves a council. The Russian word is Soviet. And one of their first decisions was to call a general strike. By the end of October, St. Petersburg was at a standstill. With 3 million workers on strike, the Tsar was forced for the first time to make concessions, and he now promised free elections to a national assembly. But the strikers were determined to hold out, and their leaders called for an end to the monarchy. Bolshevik fighting brigades, supported by hundreds of strikers, barricaded the streets. The Tsar sent for his Minister of the Interior.
This situation can't last. It's their heads or ours. I order you to take every measure you consider necessary.
The year 1905, which had begun with Bloody Sunday, ended in yet another public slaughter. The power of the Tsar seemed once again to be unchallenged, and the leaders of the Soviet were exiled. The name of its last chairman, a socialist but not yet a supporter of the Bolsheviks, was Leon Trotsky. 3 months later, the promised National Assembly met for the first time, and Lenin attacked it from exile.
The National Assembly is an unsuitable instrument for realizing the victory of the revolution. The Russian government remains a military despotism, embellished with parliamentary forms.
For his part, the Tsar summoned and dissolved the assembly as it took his fancy.
At last it is over. Today I dissolved the National Assembly. The weather was wonderful. After dinner, I read a book and took a boat trip.
This was the age of repression, and the police files of the period record the names of many who were later to play their parts in the October Revolution of 1917. Dzerzhinsky, Joseph Stalin. More than 5,000 executions took place, and 40,000 political prisoners died in jail. Tens of thousands more were condemned to penal servitude in Siberia. One of them was Michael Lebedev.
You're just a thing, they used to tell us. You belong to me, and I'll do what I like with you. Some of them showed even more respect. I feed you if I feel like it, with anything that's around. And if I don't feel like it, you starve. You're not just anything, you're my thing. We were kept in cells that must have been built for anything from 40 to 45 people. And the food, that muck wasn't food at all. We used to call it pig swill. It was just water with a few scraps swimming about in it. God knows what they were. And that was all. Well, so what? After all, a prison's a prison. All human feeling is utterly repressed by it.
In St. Petersburg society, life went on as usual, and the daughters of the well-to-do went about their charitable works. For the Russians are very generous people. Other daughters learned the graceful requirements of a leisured life. This famous academy was known as the Smolny Institute. It was from this very building that Lenin would announce the Bolshevik victory in 1917. Lenin moved to Poland after the incident at Lena because he wanted to be nearer events at home. Every day after a supper of soup and meatballs, he would finish off his article for Pravda and take it to the post office. Krupskaya described their life together.
We lived in a small, closely knit circle of comrades. Our friends used to come on walks with us. We were nicknamed the Hikers Party. And we were always being asked to concerts. Ilyich dearly loved music.
The peace and order of their country life makes a strange contrast with the revolutionary passion of Lenin's thought.
The age of the bourgeois democracy is nearly over. Soon it will give way to the age of revolution, when the working classes, organized and trained in the Marxist spirit, will overthrow the bourgeoisie and establish communism.
500 miles away in the Balkan town of Sarajevo, there were celebrations. The date was June the 28th, 1914, and the Austrian Archprince Ferdinand was paying a state visit. Waiting for him in the crowd was a young man with a pistol. On August 1st, 1914, and in Russia, a sudden feeling of unity came to the divided nation. The Tsar made his expected appearance on the balcony, swearing never to make peace while a single foreign soldier remained on the soil of Mother Russia. People cheered him. They knelt to receive his blessing, and some of them called him the great father of his people. The patriotic fever, which was shaking every warring nation of Europe, also gripped Russia. An army of 1.5 million men was mobilized in the first week of the war. Volunteers on their way to the greatest human slaughter ever known. On the bleak battlefields of Eastern Europe, 1 man in every 2 was to become a casualty. The dead often unburied, and the wounded left to freeze in their own blood. At the outbreak of war, Lenin was expelled from Poland and moved to Bern in Switzerland. There he addressed all the available Bolsheviks. They met in a wood outside the town, and Lenin outlined his views on the war.
The defeat of the Tsarist monarchy is a lesser evil than the defeat of Kaiser's Germany. The greater Russia's losses in battle, the sooner will everyone realize that the people have been betrayed. Our task is plain. Total propaganda in the armed forces as well as the civilian population. Our troops must turn their weapons away from the soldiers of the so-called enemy, who are really their own brothers. We must organize illegal groups in the armies of all nations. This war is an imperialist war. We must turn it into a civil war.